Welcome, everyone who's joined us so far. Uh, Thank you for joining us tonight for the ACLU of Maine's Guide to Legislative Advocacy. My name is Aaron Rosenblum. I'm the Engagement and Education Coordinator here at the ACLU of Maine, and I'm joined tonight by our Policy Fellow, Alicia Ray. We're very excited to present this information to you tonight. It has really never been more important to make your voice heard in this way at the legislature and to your elected representatives at every level. There is so much that we can do to protect our civil liberties and to protect each other at the state level. We've had great success doing so, even in a time when it's challenging to do so at the national level. Last year, we were able to help pass bills like LD 1971, which will go into force later this year. And we look forward to your help in that work. And thank you for work you've done before. If this is a kind of thing you've done before, if you've lobbied, if you've written and called your legislators, thank you. I hope you'll learn something new this evening. If you've never done any of these things, I hope you'll feel empowered to do so after this presentation. So tonight we will give you a little information about the ACLU of Maine, some of which you may know and some of which you may not. We'll talk a little bit about how to access our resources. Then we'll talk about advocacy from home and advocacy at the State House, especially. We'll tell you about our current legislative priorities for this legislative session, and then we'll have a Q&A. And for the Q&A, you can use the Q&A tool that should appear somewhere in your Zoom screen. You can ask questions as they occur to you, but we will try to get to as many of them as possible at the end of the presentation. So there we are, just like I promised. Aaron Rosenblum and Alicia Ray. I think that's pretty well covered. Alicia, do you want to say hi?
Hi, folks. You'll hear from me a bit more later.
There we go, a photograph and real living video of Alicia and myself. So, the ACLU of Maine is active in the courts, the state house, local government, and the community to protect and expand our civil liberties and civil rights and to protect the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And when I say Constitution, I do mean the federal Constitution, but I also mean the Constitution of the state of Maine. We have our own great document here in Maine that we work to expand just as we do at the national level with the federal Constitution. In the courts, that's done through bringing cases against the state and the federal government, but also representing individual clients when we're able to do so. At the State House, Alicia and our policy department do that by helping to make bills that expand our rights into law and helping to defeat bills that would reduce our rights and liberties. The same happens at the local government level, and the in the community part is this right here. We come to you statewide through webinars like this, but we also present in person in communities around Maine. We are talking in public libraries. We are tabling at Pride festivals. We're distributing our Know Your Rights resources. If we haven't been in your community, please get in touch. We'd love to come see you. And I happen to be the person that you'd want to talk to about that. So please feel free to get in touch. I'd love to see you in your community on behalf of the ACLU of Maine. Before we get into the big advocacy content, just a couple more of these slides. You can find out a lot about our work and stay up to date at aclumaine.org. You can sign up for our email updates. That's right there on that image of our homepage right there. You can put your email and zip code and click sign up and receive all of our email updates. But while you're on our website, you can get lots of information about our legal work and our policy work and where we're going to be. There's a news and events section. Our next webinar is on Tuesday, February 24th, also at 6 p.m. And that one is with our legal team on how the ACLU of Maine fights for immigrants' rights. So you'll hear from two of our staff attorneys who do quite different work, both of which are really impactful ways of protecting our immigrant neighbors' rights here in Maine. And of course, you can follow us on social media. We are at ACLU Maine on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And on our website, you'll also see a Take Action button in the menu options, and you can use that to contact legislators and support our priorities. You'll find sort of petitions and letters there. That's both national and Maine-focused actions. You can find information on past legislative sessions, and some of our sort of how a bill becomes a law information is there. This will be more active in a long session. You'll hear from Alicia about the structure of the legislature, but in odd-numbered years, when more bills are introduced, you may find more items there, which is to say, keep that in mind when you take today's tools and put them into action to come back and find action items there during the long session, but also during the short session. There's always something to be done. And one part of our site that is not directly connected to tonight's content, but is incredibly important in this moment, is the Know Your Rights section of our site. It's under Our Work and then Know Your Rights. Basically, it comes down to this. If we don't know our rights, then we don't know when they've been violated and we can't protect them. So we have a Know Your Rights section that has information on interacting with law enforcement, on protest, on filming and documenting government activity, on your rights in the 100-mile border zone that all of us in Maine live in, rights for students at school, rights for teachers and staff at schools. We have multilingual videos for ICE encounters, checklists for schools and places of worship and healthcare centers preparing to interact with immigration agents, and a lot more. I learn something new every time I visit that section of our website, and I've been reading it pretty closely for at least a year. So please familiarize yourself with your rights. Please spread the word about your rights. We even have a Know Your Rights page about informing other people about their rights. So please spread the word. And with that, I'm very excited to turn things over to Alicia Ray.
Great. Thank you, Aaron. So let's talk at a 10,000-foot view about legislative advocacy here in Maine. We have a citizens legislature where bills are written and introduced. The legislators introduce and sponsor these bills, and sometimes they're called a concept draft. You'll see a title for a bill, and then there won't be any language attached to it. And that is something that sponsors might be holding for an idea that they're going to later develop, and they're just not sure what they're going to do with that vehicle yet. But most of the time, sponsors have a pretty clear idea of what their intent with the bill is going to be, and they have the revisor's office help them draft a bill. Those are introduced mostly in the first regular session of each legislature, and then they move through the process. Each bill is assigned to a committee. Those are committees of jurisdiction, is what we call them here in Maine. There's quite a few. We've got transportation, there's judiciary, there's veterans and legal affairs, and each of these committees takes up their relevant bills. Those bills are heard, debated, and voted on in committee. And oftentimes, through that hearing, debate, and then ultimate vote, they are amended as they're worked through. Then those bills go back to the chambers where they originated, either the House or the Senate. And there they're also debated and possibly amended and voted on as well. The governor then has the choice to sign, veto, or allow into law without her signature. And most laws come into effect after the end of the legislative session, although there are some emergency bills, but those take 2/3 of the legislature voting in the affirmative, which is quite a high bar to reach in these days. So not seeing a ton of emergency legislation. It might be proposed that way, but the emergency preambles might fall off if the sponsor decides that's not politically viable for the bill. And this is for everyone. Anyone can be an advocate, and it has a wide range. So I am a registered lobbyist for the state of Maine. I submit an ethics report each month because I lobby more than 8 hours every month. And I tell the Maine Ethics Commission what bills I spend my time lobbying on. And I keep very close track of that alongside our other lobbyist here. But anyone can do this. It can be as much as going to the state house and working on a bill and communicating with the legislator back and forth and working it with them and sharing your personal experience and expertise to sending an email. Anyone can do this. And that individual advocacy matters so much in Maine. We have such a small population, so your voice really does matter. Senate districts in the state of Maine only represent about 38,000 constituents, and the House districts represent about 7,500 constituents. So, pretty small numbers we're talking about here. And some of these races have been decided by as few as one vote. For example, in 2024, House District 141 in Sanford was truly decided by one vote. And so there is a lot of opportunity to make a difference here. The state house is the people's house, and legislators want to hear from the people. So there are many ways that we're going to talk about advocating. You do not have to do all of them, but a combination is usually a good idea. So as we're talking through this, try to think about what your capacity is and what might fit and what you want to engage with and what you can do well. So pick a few as we go through tonight.
So I'm going to start us out with some of those means of advocating that Alicia was talking about, and then I'll pass it back to Alicia. I'll cover some of the basics from a sort of citizen standpoint. I am not a registered lobbyist in the state of Maine, nor any kind of lobbyist really. And then Alicia will come back with that sort of pro perspective. So again, to sort of just get right back into what Alicia was saying, this is really a legislature made up of our neighbors. It's a citizen legislature, or sometimes called a part-time legislature as well, because it doesn't run all year, every year. Our legislators serve for 2-year terms, so they're never kind of too far from thinking about the needs of the community in a sort of election sense and whether they want to continue serving. Many of them have other jobs. Many of them have other jobs and families and other obligations. So when you think about the number of bills that are introduced, it was over 2,000 in the last session. They really need some help prioritizing, and sometimes they get that from organizations like the ACLU of Maine, but really the most powerful source is you, their constituents, getting in touch, telling them what's important to you. And as we'll talk about in a bit, if you can identify the bill, if you can't just say that, environmental regulation is really important to me, or privacy, an ACLU of Maine issue is really important to me. But if you can tell them the bill that you think is really good or really bad, it really helps them to be able to be responsive to you as their representative in the legislature. So many of you have perhaps called or emailed Susan Collins or Angus King or Shelley Pingree or Jared Golden. I certainly have. But I wonder whether all of you have called your state senator and state rep. I admit that I do that a little less often. It's sort of a little easier to see the big national things happening and to reach out or sign on to an email. But finding the contact information for your state legislators is very possible, and it makes a big difference. It's really an effective way to get their attention, and it's also most effective when you contact your own legislators. So just as sort of with the federal level, contacting the people you sent there to Augusta is going to be the most effective way. Um, you can find that info on the Maine Legislature website. There are tools there to find your senator and your representative. There are also a couple other ways of finding them. If you live in a bigger city like Portland, some of the tools which are built around searching by town are not quite as effective. You can also use the state voter information portal where you look up your polling place. That will also tell you what districts you're in. So if you need to use the district numbers on the state tool, you can do that as well. One really important thing to keep in mind when writing to your legislators is that doing so may create records that can be found through Maine's Freedom of Access Act, which is the main version of what we call federally the Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, and here in Maine, FOA. You may be creating a public record that may be subject to FOA requests. So you might keep that in mind while writing, but hopefully it will not prohibit you. It doesn't prohibit you, and hopefully it won't keep you from expressing what you would like to see from the legislature. So, talking to legislators in the community is another great way. Many of us, live in the same towns as our legislators, may or may not live in the same town as a senator, depending on where in Maine and the size of the Senate district. But these are folks who are around. And again, because it is a citizen legislature and it's not in session all the time, they're not spending all of their time in Augusta, I guess, except if they represent Augusta in the legislature. So you may see them. Some legislators hold office hours in their communities, which is a good way to find them. Not all of them do. Some send out email updates. So if you get on their email list, you may find out when those are. You can also invite your legislator to events. I was at a panel a few weeks ago with a former state legislator who said that he just loved to be invited to things. He was always looking for ways to engage. And so letting them know that you'd be interested in them coming to your community meeting or your rally or your event, they may want to show up and hear from people and let people know about their work. So it's also important in this sort of citizen legislature model to remember to respect the boundaries of the legislators. If you have a pre-existing relationship with your legislator, maybe you do want to approach them in the post office or the grocery store, but you also may want to respect that they have their other work to do or their family to spend time with. And so bear that in mind. Spaces where they've decided to be like a public event or their office hours obviously are pretty fair game. And beyond that, it might be kind of up to your legislator, your district, and how the feeling is there. So this part I think is really exciting. If you have mostly written and called and you haven't been to Augusta before, don't be afraid. The State House is right there. It's for you. It's the people's house. I don't want to say if you go, I want to say when you go to the State House. Here are some things to know because the logistics can honestly be as intimidating as any other part of it. Can you park at the State House? You can. There's free parking. There are surface lots and there's a garage that are all free. There's also street parking not far away. You enter on, I guess, the west side of the building, which you can see in the photo here. That's where the current entrance is. There is a security checkpoint there. You go through a metal detector. There's a bag scanner, but you can bring in your sort of normal things, your wallet and your phone, things like that. You can bring in signs to display. You can bring in information like leaflets if you want to hand those out to legislators. You can bring your testimony. Alicia will talk about testifying in committee, and if you want to print that out and bring it with you, you certainly can do that. And let's see, there are the services you might need spending a day in any public building. There are restrooms freely available. There is a cafeteria between the State House and the State Office building, which is next to it, out of frame in this photo. So food is available. That's actually also, I won't go back to the previous slide, but that's also a great place to see your legislators. I was there a few weeks ago and in a meeting in the cafeteria, and my state representative happened to walk by and sit at the next table. So I was able to chat with him. because he happened to also want to eat lunch during his day at the Capitol. So you can use all of those spaces. You can hang out if you want at the State House. So if you're going there, it's probably to talk about a bill, and we want to make sure that you know how to identify the bills that you care about. This is important because all of the bills get a public hearing in a committee, and those are the really high impact times to go to testify, of course, on those bills, but also to catch the legislators when it's fresh in their mind. So there is a legislative bill tracker that you can go to legislature.maine.gov/bill tracker or Google Maine Legislature Bill Tracker, and it should come up. And in their advanced search, you can do it like a free text search. You could search for the subjects that interest you and see what bills are up. Um, there are also organizations like the ACLU of Maine that will sometimes put together guides and identify bills of interest. Alicia will be doing that later in this presentation. But if there are other organizations that you trust and that you follow here in Maine in whatever topic issue area you're interested in, their websites may also have a legislative guide to the session, and they may have their priority bills. And again, if it's a trusted source and an organization that you like, go have a look at what bills they're highlighting for sure. So I'm going to hand it back to Alicia to tell you more of the nuts and bolts of really being effective in the hallways, literally in this picture, in the hallways in the State House.
Great. So, one of the ways you can lobby in the legislature is truly in the chamber hallways. So, the two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate chambers, are at the two ends of the hallways on the third floor of the State House. And a common practice is to line the hallways. And you'll see in this photo here, there was a group organized. I believe this was by some of our coalition partners. And I just found this very happy looking photo of them to put in here as an example. Um, and you can organize and bring signs. And these folks had a list of people who they wanted to catch going into the chambers, different representatives or different senators they wanted to talk to. It's a good idea to know who you're trying to reach out to. The legislature's website has a photo of each legislator, so you're not kind of just guessing or trying to read name tags. Many of the legislators do not wear their name tags, unfortunately, so it can be a guessing game sometimes. But lobbyists like myself tend to know who they are. So if you see me in the hallways, you're always welcome to ask me if you're looking for someone in particular. You can bring signs in. They do have to be respectful signs, so I would recommend that. And if you don't catch the legislator or legislators you're looking for, the House of Representatives has a list of seat assignments outside of their chamber. You can write them a note and send that in. You can ask them to come out and speak with you, or you could put your entire message on that note and ask one of the chamber staff to deliver it. The Senate is a little easier. You can just put the senator's name on it and ask chamber staff to deliver that. And they may step out if you ask them to, or you might just deliver your whole message if they're really in the middle of voting. If the bell starts ringing while you're talking to them, please do not be offended. They do have to go back into the chamber to take their votes. So that can sometimes happen. And if you're bringing signs in, it often helps if you're in a group, but I have seen many folks, sometimes repeat folks, be the only person holding a sign. So up to you. Um, Another way you can advocate in the legislature is public hearings. This is often the most common way that people come to advocate. And this is the public's opportunity to be heard on bills. You can testify in person, via Zoom, or via written testimony. And this is before a legislative committee, which is made up of members from the state Senate and members of the House of Representatives. ACLU of Maine, we commonly testify before judiciary, criminal justice and public safety, and veterans and legal affairs for the most part. In-person or Zoom testimony is most often limited to 3 minutes of speaking time, but sometimes if there is a high turnout, that gets reduced to 2 minutes, or sometimes, worst case scenario, if we're getting close to midnight, 1 minute, which can be tough to meet that brief. After you deliver your testimony, the committee chairs often ask if the committee has any clarifying questions. And if you're testifying in person, you should bring 21 copies of your testimony written out that you're going to be delivering. 20 copies for the committee to hand out, and 1 copy so you can read it yourself. Your written testimony has no page or length requirements, but it's best practice to include your name, city or town of residence, whether you support, oppose, or are neither for nor against the legislation. It can be submitted online before the public hearing or after, but ideally a few days before the work session happens so that the committee members can see it before they start making amendments to the bill. And in both your oral and written testimony, there are some traditions we follow. I've put an example of our testimony here on the right-hand side, but testimony traditionally starts with greeting the Senate chair and then the House chair, and then the members of the committee of jurisdiction. So here, Senator Carney, Representative Kuhn, and distinguished members of the Joint Standing Committee on Judiciary. Greetings. It is second nature to me at this point, but I realize it's kind of unnatural phrasing for most folks, but this is traditionally the way we do it. Then you make sure to introduce yourself, where you're from, and what your position on the legislation is. And then it's up to you what you include. I would consider including any personal experience you have with the issue at hand, or if you have any expertise on the issue, that's a great time to share it. And you can say whatever you like at this point, except for threats or obscenities. Those will be objected to by the committee. And you cannot use any props, including holding up your testimony as a piece of paper to gesticulate with. So just be cautious of those parameters, but it's pretty free form otherwise. And that's about it for handing that in. I will say your oral testimony and written testimony does not have to match. Oftentimes, if you have a longer written presentation or you want to include some research you've done or statistics stapled to your written testimony, and obviously you're not going to be able to get through that in 3 minutes, that's okay. That can still be handed out to the committee if your oral remarks are shorter. Beyond coming up for public hearings and submitting online testimony, another great way to advocate is sharing and resharing accurate information. In this day and age, resharing and sharing accurate information and helping us to dispel dis and misinformation is so critical. The ways you can do this is online, but also in the papers. Letters to the editor can serve as compelling ways to share that correct information. And this was a key tool for the No on Question 1 campaign this past November. ACLU of Maine, it's on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, and X at ACLU Maine. And reposting our materials is a great way to spread that accurate information. And you can look for other trustworthy organizations as well. And then I'm going to keep going with our legislative priorities from this session. The key issues we're looking at this session and working on, starting with immigrants' rights. So currently are working a bill LD 2106. This is a sensitive locations policy framework. So essentially, it would protect civil immigration enforcement in locations such as public schools and libraries and public healthcare facilities. This is in response to the fact that the federal government revoked their own sensitive locations policy that had been in place, some version of it from 1993 until 2025. And the legislature and the sponsor particularly recognize that public education and public health are needs, not privileges. And so by putting up a statutory framework that will protect those locations, we're hoping that these will increase protections for immigrants in those locations. We're also supporting Indigenous justice through LDs 395 and 785. Those bills were just scheduled for a public hearing next Thursday, February 19th at 10 a.m. for LD 395 and 1 p.m. for LD 785, and both deal with Wabanaki sovereignty. We also continue work on criminal legal reform. LDs 1916, 17, 18, and 19 are all task force recommendations from the Criminal Records Sealing Committee. And these would allow people to more easily re enter society and build a stable life after incarceration. LD 1911 is a similar bill to that, and these bills are kind of working in conjunction with each other to advance that idea. And then data privacy has been and continues to be a huge priority for us. Excitingly, this week, LD 1822, which is Maine's Online Data Privacy Act, passed the House of Representatives and is now on its way to the Maine Senate. It is one of the strongest consumer data privacy bills in the nation. It was carried over from last session, and we're continuing to advocate for its passage. And so you might be seeing some messaging from us soon about passing it in the Maine Senate. And we are opposing a bill that would protect Mainers' privacy. So LD 1457 is an automated license plate reader bill that's coming through the Transportation Committee. This bill would allow the Maine Turnpike Authority to install automated license plate readers. And this type of dragnet surveillance poses a significant threat to our Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable searches by government authorities. So we're going to keep working on this bill and trying to oppose it and get it to a place where it protects Mainers' privacy. I'll turn it back to Erin now.
It's okay, Alicia. You can thank everyone and tell them that it's time for Q&A. You can ask your Q&A questions in the with the Q&A tool. We have a couple that we'll get to, but please add more. Um, and we've thanked you with this large text block enough that we will just go to you seeing our smiling faces. Um, so, Alicia, there was a question about when the hearing dates are, if there are, for the Indigenous Justice Bills LD 395 and 785. Did I get the numbers right? Do those have dates yet?
Yes, so LD 395 is Thursday, February 19th at 10 a.m. in the Judiciary Committee. And then LD 785 is the same date, February 19th at 1 p.m. in the Judiciary Committee. I expect both of those public hearings will be pretty packed. So I do not know that 1 p.m. will be the actual start time for LD 785, but I encourage folks to sign up, head to the State House, show up in force for supporting those bills.
Right. Thank you. There was a question about sort of, I think, whether folks could inquire or maybe talk to their state legislators about national issues, or whether the state legislation is only about state issues. My inclination, which I would love for you to expand on, is that bills passed here do concern national issues that we're all concerned about, like LD 1971, for example. But how do people make national issues come home to Maine or have an effect on them here?
Sure. So sometimes if it is a federal issue solely, there might not be a ton that can be done about it. But sometimes we can get creative. So I mentioned LD 2106. We had to and are continuing to get pretty creative in how we are framing it because the state government cannot regulate the federal government. And so this bill is a statutory framework that regulates state entities. It is providing direction to state entities, not to the federal government at all. And so you are so welcome to talk to your state legislators about what's going on federally and about what we can try to do here in Maine to protect people and their civil rights and civil liberties. And we can try to find solutions because there is power in the states.
Great. Speaking of protecting people's rights and liberties, we have an attendee asking, will the ACLU of Maine take a stand on the anti-trans student athlete referendum?
So those folks have not yet qualified for the ballot. I will say that we're at that point in the process. So starting there, if they do qualify for the ballot, the ACLU of Maine we testified last year against all 8 anti-trans bills, and we're part of a coalition in defeating all 8 anti-trans bills, and we will continue to uphold that stance. We will not be in favor of it, that's for sure, and we will be forcefully against it.
Thank you. So we have a question about um, whether you need to sign up in advance to give oral testimony, or can you just show up at the committee hearing?
That's a great question. It used to be that you had to sign up in advance. If it's a very hot button issue, sometimes the committees will send out kind of an advisory email ahead of time saying that a sign up sheet will be available prior to the hearing. And you do have to physically be there at, say, 9 a.m. to sign up for a 1 p.m. hearing or noon for a 1 p.m. hearing, that sort of thing. But that's not super typical. Um, and mostly the practice is you just kind of show up. The chairs will ask, is there any member of the public who's here supporting the legislation? Everyone kind of looks around, sees if someone got up or not. And if no one got up, you get up, go up to the stand at the podium, deliver your testimony and write your name down on the roster in front of you. So generally, no. If it's going to be a big issue, like I'm indicating for the Wabanaki bills next week, there might be an advisory sent out, and that will be posted on the committee website.
And so after that testimony is given, we have a question about what goes on in committee deliberations. And the person asking says the back room deliberations. So whether it happens in the committee room itself or some room behind. But what happens after you deliver this testimony?
Sure. So a number of things could happen. Um, Sometimes the sponsor hears from the public that their idea is a very bad idea. And at the work session, they recommend that the committee vote ought not to pass. And we refer to that as them killing their bill. And sometimes that happens. They had an idea, they thought it would solve a problem, it does not. And they save everyone time and dispense with it. Otherwise, they might take the feedback that they heard from the public hearing and work with the committee analyst to put out a sponsor's amendment before the work session. That is very common practice to take that feedback and incorporate it before the committee does their work on it. Um, Sometimes that doesn't happen, and the feedback kind of just exists in the ether, and the committee might take that feedback and apply it for a committee amendment. So a number of things could happen with that public hearing feedback. Ideally, it is used in a positive way to improve the bill. But work sessions are a place where the committee has those discussions in the open. Work sessions are streamed, live streamed on the committee web pages, and you're also welcome to attend those as members of the public. It's just that members of the public are not called up to speak at those. Sometimes the ACLU of Maine is invited to speak at those. Our coalition partners are. State entities might be invited to speak at those, but it's not really like the public's opportunity to speak. That is kind of solely at the public hearing, which is why I would advise getting your testimony in before the work session so it can be considered as part of the work session. But yeah, those conversations happen for the most part in front of the public. If side conversations are happening, they're not happening between the whole committee. So those are conversations that mostly unfold in public.
Sure. So we have two sort of linked questions. Someone who arrived late, which is fine. We're so happy that you're here. So they missed whether you can only testify in person. And a separate person asked when the hearing is for LD 2106, which I believe already happened. So, what are the ways that you can submit testimony if you are not there? in person. You did somewhat cover it, but this is a new part, which is what about if the hearing already happened?
Sure. So LD 2106, I'll start there. That hearing already happened, and we have had two work sessions on that bill. That does not mean you can't submit testimony. It will become a part of the legislative record. So in 10 years from now, if this bill passes and someone wants to figure out how and why, your testimony would be part of that record that they uncover for that, which is pretty cool. But it probably won't be considered as part of the feedback for moving forward on the work session. So just know that. But I do think if you have something to say about it, it's important to put that into the record. That work session, I think, happened 2 weeks ago. Um, I do not have my calendar in front of me, so I'm not quite sure. And what was the other question, Aaron? I'm so sorry.
Um, so it was whether it's in person only. So
Oh,
you
yeah.
can submit written, and if you submit written ahead, then it will presumably be considered, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it was the 2106 was the specific example. Um, and let's see. So thank you for that. We have a question about license plate readers, which Alicia and I were just talking about earlier today with students. So I heard ICE was using license plate readers at Lowe's and Home Depot, presumably in their recent surge of activity here. If Maine bans license plate readers, will feds still be able to use them?
It's an interesting way to frame that. So trying to think about how that would be regulated. I guess it depends on like what the language is for the ban in the statute. Again, like regulating the federal government as the state is pretty hard to do because of the supremacy clause and intergovernmental immunity. So I think it would depend like how that is framed. Um, I am very interested in a ban on ALPRs, but depends on the appetite of the legislature and I think the framing of that language.
Okay, it seemed like a complex one. Just wanted to wanted to see what would happen. Um, And we have, I have a question to throw in, and we have at least one more. You mentioned that you can support or oppose, and you could also submit testimony as neither for nor against. And I was wondering if you could explain why, if you are neither for nor against something, you would still say something about it. I think many of us come from testifying about or writing in about the things we feel most strongly about passing or keeping from being passed. So what is the case for the neither for nor against testimony?
Sure. So most often, neither for nor against is reserved for like the state entities. They use it the most, and they tend to use it to raise like points of information. Have you considered this might be relevant as you work this bill? But other entities might use it too. Those who really don't want to wade into the political fracas, as it were. So you are more than welcome to use that as a position as well. Particularly, maybe if you have a job that you can't be political at, that sort of thing, and you want to raise important points of information, offer your expertise or your personal experience in that way. Neither for nor against is a helpful way to do that.
Great, thank you. Um, yeah, so we do have a question about how the hearing went, and I assume that this attendee means 2106. So how did that go?
Yeah, it was one of those hot button ones where there was a lot of turnout, but very little opposition. The I believe one in-person testifier who was in opposition was a former federal agent who offered some helpful points of like clarification about what that looked like on the ground, but mostly supportive testimony. That bill it is going to have a sponsors amendment coming up pretty soon, but I don't know when the next work session will be scheduled for that, but we're feeling really good about it.
Okay. And just a couple more. I think, could you say a little bit more? You mentioned this with neither for nor against. Um, if you testify for a bill or against a bill, um, what is what is the First Amendment implication around things like workplace retaliation? Can you be punished for your testimony? Is that merely up to your employer, or are there any sort of protections that you could lean on?
Sure. So a lot of folks do ask about this, and your opinions are your own. You are allowed to testify. Um, Yeah, you should feel free to. If you identify yourself as a worker of that employer, things might be a little trickier for you. But if you're more general, you say, I'm a doctor with X years of experience who wants to weigh in this way, just to show that expertise, which might be helpful to the committee to understand, versus I work for this employer for 30 years. That those are slightly different, right? And so you should feel welcome to give your expertise, give your experience, but make it your own and not the ownership of someone else's, I would say is the safest way to do that. And you should not be retaliated against for speaking your mind.
Yeah. And so, staying on testimony, despite that, people go and testify about things that may not be popular at home, in their town, in their household, at their in place of employment. So there's really some bravery involved sometimes. I was wondering if you could talk about a time where you've seen testimony. First of all, you don't have to say who is the bravest person who ever testified that you've seen, but could you talk about seeing testimony, make a difference in a specific case on a specific bill where it wasn't just, it's always great to go make your voice heard, but a place where somebody went up there, gave their testimony, or a group of people, and you really saw the impact on a bill?
Sure. So trying to think about a couple of them. I will say, the ACLU of Maine, we sometimes have unpopular opinions in testimony, particularly related to like mandatory sentencing. Our testimony on that has sometimes been a little difficult for committees to receive, particularly as they relate to certain crimes. So I will say, like, we're with you on that. I will say we've seen some incredible bravery from formerly incarcerated folks, especially youth and juveniles, who have been a part of the criminal justice system and who have been caught up in that, sharing their own experiences, and just sharing the truth of that experience with committees. Committees hold a lot of power, and particularly that's before the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee often. And a lot of former law enforcement sit on that committee as legislators now. And they bring a lot of expertise to that committee, but that's a really interesting power dynamic to see happen there. And so their opinion, feels maybe a little adversarial or oppositional to the folks who they're talking to, but like they are brave about it and they share what their truth is. And it's really powerful and it can make a difference to understand what their lived experience was, because the folks on that committee don't have that.
Yeah. And in terms of large groups, and maybe a legislature without a huge amount of lived experience. The transports bill, last session, were there 6 hours of testimony
Oh
primarily?
no, we went till midnight on that one.
Right.
And
Um,
yeah, such bravery from folks. That was incredible. And then I will tell you, the next week we had LD 1971, which was our immigrant rights bill from last session. And folks who, for the first time, came out to oppose the anti-trans bills came back the next week, and it just like was amazing to hear people say, I know that my immigrant neighbors can't come out here to advocate for themselves, so I'm here to advocate for them because last week felt so powerful. And it was just like this beautiful moment. And so that blew my mind.
yeah. I remember you coming back from those sessions, and yeah, it seemed really impressive and like the sort of ideal of what we've been talking about tonight. We have one more that's sort of bill specific. and maybe we'll start to wrap up. But we have someone asking for a little more detail on the privacy bill. That's 1822, right?
Yes.
Um, so, and asking about the state level benefits of it. And they're also asking, what are there things that can't be included in it because of federal law?
Um, are there things that so mm, interesting. So consumer data privacy is mostly about like regulating private companies, I would say, is the goal of it. So private companies, what they currently do is they collect, retain, store tons of our data with the goal of selling it. It's a profit thing, right? And they are currently selling a lot of it to the government. So the government is getting at our data without a warrant, and that's a violation of our rights. So in this like profit economy, surveillance economy that they've created, we're trying to give consumers more control over their data so they get a say in what's collected, but also minimize how much data those companies are allowed to collect in the first instance. If they don't have that data, they can't sell it, and it can't be like inadvertently disclosed in a breach per se. And so it's more about regulating those private entities more so than the governments themselves. Um, and it does implicate the government in the end because the government has been buying lots of this data. Just last month in January, the ACLU published documents showing that the Department of Homeland Security had bought highly sensitive location data without a warrant from private companies. And so we've shown this over time. Um, so it definitely is a real problem. And as more states adopt these online data privacy laws, those become the gold standard, right? Most businesses are going to conform with the highest standard of data privacy just so they have uniformity across all the states. And so if we're setting that pace, that's really great for the whole nation.
Uh, we we have this batch of great new questions coming in, and we do have a few more minutes. So I don't,
Yeah, why
and
not?
so many of you are still with us, so we'll try to fit them in. One I think is really timely because the phrase "new Mainer" appears in the question, but I think it means someone who moved here recently, perhaps from another U.S. state. But I think this applies to all kinds of new Mainers. And it's what's your sense of how Maine state representatives are or aren't receptive to the testimony or advocacy from folks from away? And my quick answer is they know that you're from away, and you could just assume they're not going to look up and see how recent your, recently your, house was sold or something. But what do you think?
Sure. So they represent constituents of theirs, not necessarily voters of theirs. And so I think if you say you're a resident of Lewiston, that means you're a resident of Lewiston, and you could be a voter of theirs or you couldn't. You might have been around for their past election, you might not. So I think as long as you have residency in a Maine municipality, you're pretty solid. I think that's going to be respected here.
Great. Um, and then a equally divisive topic. Uh, but any suggestion on how to speak with legislators who hold a different position from yours? If you go in knowing that your legislator supports what you oppose, or vice
Mhm.
versa, what's the best way to approach them?
Sure. So I try to start with a place of um, asking questions, curiosity. Can you identify where we should start this conversation? Like, is it a policy question? Is there a part of the bill that you're hoping for some compromise on? And just trying to get at it, right? There are bills like LD 1822, which are massive. There is a lot in there, and there are a lot of moving parts. And then there are sometimes simpler bills. It's funding for public defenders. Um, and so maybe it's the amount of funding, or maybe it's that the next public defense office that's being opened is Cumberland and they're in Aroostook, that sort of thing. And so coming from this place of curiosity has always at least opened a conversation with me. And I think I just set my expectations usually. Changing minds in the legislature can be really, really difficult. But if you are sharing your personal story and your own expertise in the matter, that can sometimes move someone along. And this can be a long process sometimes. The Consumer Data Privacy Bill has been a while in the making. Um, Lots of hearts and minds have changed over time, and lots of details in that bill have changed over time. That's just the legislative process. Some legislators have changed over time as well. And so it's really incremental change at times. And so maybe people's minds change. I can think of some folks who, after each election, have had a different opinion on a different bill.
Well, I think that's a great answer on which to wrap up. The possibility of change and people changing their minds. We have another webinar coming up on Tuesday, the 24th with our legal team. Again, that's how we fight for immigrants' rights here at the ACLU of Maine. Please join us for that. You can find info on our website, aclumaine.org. We also have a couple new forms, legal intake forms for people who have witnessed ICE or immigration agents racial profiling or detaining people without warrants, and one for ICE observers whose rights have been violated. Those are at aclumaine.org/intake. There's a link in the chat for our next webinar now. And I want to thank you all for coming and for sticking with us. And I want to thank Alicia Ray, our policy fellow, and wish you all a safe and healthy and happy evening and upcoming weekend, long weekend. I hope it's a long weekend for all of you. Thank you, Alicia.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.